Why has the EU responded differently to Donald Trump than Canada has? Canada chose a confrontational strategy, introducing retaliatory tariffs, and Mark Carney openly encouraged middle powers to challenge the dominant economies that shape and benefit from the international economic order. EU adopted a different approach, emphasizing diplomacy, negotiation, and restraint. Ursula von der Leyen focused on preserving coalitions, reassuring partners and investors, and framing transatlantic tensions as coordination problems rather than fundamental conflicts. Economics and management may help explain the strategic differences in coping with the rupture in the rule-based system, where great powers use economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. Canada acts as a single sovereign state, with one government, one negotiating position, and a unified economic risk profile. This enables their government to identify costs and benefits, formulate credible retaliatory threats, and implement them without significant internal coordination problems. In negotiation theory, power is not only a matter of size, but of credible commitment. The EU faces a very different situation. It is composed of 27 member states with heterogeneous economic structures, political priorities, and exposure to US trade policy. Aggressive retaliation would not affect member states symmetrically. Each member state would bear very different costs. EU thus face a classic collective action problem. While aggregate gains from a common strategy may be positive, the incentives to bear the costs are unevenly distributed. From a risk management perspective, the EU's primary threat is not Donald Trump as such, but the risk of internal fragmentation. A confrontational stance could amplify internal tensions, increase pressure for national exemptions, and ultimately weaken the Union's common trade policy. This constitutes a systemic risk that outweighs potential short-term gains from escalation. Economic negotiation theory also highlights a commitment problem. Threats are only effective if the counterpart expects them to be carried out. The EU's governance structure, where authority is shared between the Commission, the Council, and the Member States, makes it more difficult to convince an opponent that escalation will be followed through consistently. The key question, therefore, is whether the EU realistically could do as Canada without altering its fundamental mode of operation. A more confrontational strategy would require greater centralization, faster decision-making, and a higher degree of shared risk. Such changes are unlikely in the short term. Until then, the EU's emphasis on caution over escalation reflects not a lack of political will, but the structural logic of the Union itself, where institutional stability remains the dominant strategic priority.